before you were born. Long before your parents were born. Long before even your grandparents were born. Today we're going to take a journey to a time before the dinosaurs. A time before the first animals. A time before the first plants. A time even before the first germs. In fact, we're going to go back almost 14 billion years. 14 billion is a lot of years. That's 10 billion years before the first living things appeared on Earth. And 9 billion years before the Earth was even formed. You see, 15 billion years ago, our universe did not exist. There were no people. There were no plants or animals. There were no stars. Our sun, our planet, our moon, and everything else that we know of did not exist. Or if they did exist, they existed in a form very different than we know them today. All the things that we know, people, pencils, schools, cars, video games, houses, bicycles, soccer balls, planets and stars, everything that we know in the universe was mushed together in a very small space. That space was smaller than our classroom, smaller than your iPad, smaller than a tiny piece of paper, smaller than a crumb, and even smaller than an atom.
Now let's pause our story for a moment and carefully and very slowly rub your hands together. Very slow. Now a little faster. Now super fast. Now stop. When we move our hands, we create heat. When we stop moving our hands, we stop creating heat. Of course, our bodies are making heat all the time, as our blood, heart, lungs, and muscles inside our body are constantly in motion. As we move, whether it be our hands, our whole body, or just the blood inside our body, as we move, we make heat.
Now back to the time before the universe began. Everything in the universe was mushed together. Everything was all together, with no space between anything. There was no space between anything or between any part of anything. And since there was no space, there was no space between things. And since there was no space between things, nothing had any space to move. And since nothing could move, nothing could rub against each other. And with no moving and no rubbing, there was no heat. With no heat, everything was cold. With no heat, there was no light. Before the universe began, it was cold, and it was dark.
How dark was it? When we turn off the lights in the classroom gets dark enough to see videos on the whiteboard. When we shut the shades, the sunlight can't come in, and the classroom appears even darker.
But a dark classroom is much brighter than the darkness before the universe began. When we turn off the lights at night, before we go to sleep, and shut the shades, it gets even darker. But the darkness of our rooms with the shades shut is still much brighter than it was before the universe began.
You are now sitting in this very dark room, wearing blindfolds to help you see how dark it was before the universe began. But even with your blindfolds, there is still some light.
If you're not doing so already, try closing your eyes under the blindfold. Now it's really dark. But even in the dark room, with the blindfold on, and your eyes closed, some light still gets in.
Before the universe began, there was no light to get in.
There was no light anywhere, so no light could get in anywhere. If you went from a place before the universe began to where you are now, under your blindfold, the tiny bit of light shining through your eyelids, shining through your blindfold, that tiny bit of light would seem so bright that you would instantly be blinded by its brightness.
The tiny bit of light shining through your blindfold would seem brighter than the sun on the sunniest day ever at the beach.
Compared to how dark it was before the universe began, what you see right now would be brighter than looking directly into the sun. Before the universe began, it was not only dark, it was also cold.
How cold was it? Let's see.
Let's think of some of the things we know that are cold. Cold air this morning, cold pavement yesterday or earlier in the week, ice, snow.
In just a moment, I'm going to take your hands and place them somewhere cold. Remember to stay quiet when I do so.
And never ever put your hands in your mouth. What do you feel? The ice is cold, but compared to how cold it was before the universe began, the ice is not cold at all. In fact, the ice is much warmer than the temperature before the universe began.
Before the universe began, the temperature was colder than ice. Colder than Antarctica.
Colder than outer space. Colder than Pluto. Even colder than it is on the farthest dwarf planets in our solar system.
Now imagine taking a bath in the ice water. That bath would feel very cold. But if you were there before the universe began, and then stepped into a bath of ice water, the ice water would feel like a hot tub by comparison.
Before the universe began, it was so cold that the ice water would feel hot.
Put your hands back in your lap now and spend a minute in silence. Think about the cold, think about the dark, and think about everything we know today in the universe mushed together into a space
Smaller than you,
Smaller than your iPad.
and smaller than a speck of dust.
Think about what it must have been like.
In that very small
Very cold.
and very dark space. In 1 minute, I'm going to count backwards from 10, and then tell you to take off your blindfolds.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Remove your blindfolds.